What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a live daytime talk show expecting a thoughtful conversation, but instead finds himself in a tense, unexpected clash with some of the most outspoken hosts on television? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already clapping as Henry Cavill walks out onto the stage. He smiles politely, gives a small wave, and takes his seat. There's a mix of admiration and curiosity in the room. He's known for being calm, composed, and rarely controversial. Whoopi leans forward slightly, smiling but with that familiar, sharp tone underneath. "Henry, welcome. It's nice to have you here." Henry nods. "Thank you, it's great to be here." Joy jumps in almost immediately. "You don't do a lot of these, do you? You're a bit private." Henry lets out a small laugh. "I suppose I like to keep things simple. Focus on the work." The audience chuckles softly. The tone is light for now. Sunny tilts her head slightly. "But you are in the public eye, though. People are interested in more than just the work." Henry nods again. "Of course. I understand that. There's just a balance, I think." Whoopi nods slowly, watching him closely. Balance is interesting, because a lot of people feel celebrities pick and choose when they want privacy and when they want attention. There's a slight shift in the room. It's subtle but noticeable. Henry keeps his composure. "I think that's fair in some cases. But I can only speak for myself." Joy leans forward. "So let's speak about you then." A few audience members laugh nervously. Joy continues. "You've built this image, very controlled, very polished. Some people say maybe too polished. Like we don't really know who you are." Henry pauses for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Well, I'd say what you see is who I am. I'm just not someone who feels the need to share everything publicly." Whoopi raises an eyebrow slightly. "But isn't that part of the job now?" Henry looks at her directly, still calm. "I think the job is to act." A few claps break out from the audience. Joy quickly jumps in, a bit sharper now. "That sounds nice, but that's not really how it works anymore, right? You're part of a bigger machine. Media, fans, influence." Henry nods. "Sure. But I think there's a difference between engaging with fans and feeling entitled to someone's personal life." The audience reacts, a mix of claps and a few murmurs. Sunny leans forward. "But don't you think fans invest in you? Emotionally, financially, they support your career." Henry responds gently. "And I'm incredibly grateful for that. Truly. But I think appreciation shouldn't come with ownership." That line lands. You can feel it. There's a brief pause. Whoopi shifts slightly in her seat. "So you're saying fans don't have a right to expect anything beyond your performances?" Henry keeps eye contact. "I think they have the right to enjoy the work, to be inspired, to connect with stories. But beyond that, I think boundaries are healthy." Joy exhales, almost laughing. "Boundaries. That's a word people in Hollywood love these days." A few audience members laugh, but it's tense now. Henry smiles slightly. "I think people everywhere appreciate boundaries." Whoopi leans in again, her tone firmer now. "Let me ask you this. When you benefit from fame, from attention, from people talking about you, isn't it a bit convenient to then say, 'I want boundaries,' when the conversation goes somewhere you don't like?" The audience reacts with a louder murmur. This is the moment where things start to heat up. Henry doesn't rush his answer. "I don't think it's about convenience," he says calmly. "I think it's about respect." Whoopi tilts her head. "Respect goes both ways." Henry nods. "Exactly. There's a beat. And I respect the audience enough to give my best work. I respect interviews like this by showing up honestly. But I also believe I can choose what parts of my life remain private." Sunny interjects quickly. "But what if people feel that creates distance? Like you're not relatable?" Henry smiles slightly, almost amused. "I think being relatable doesn't require sharing everything. I think it comes from authenticity." Joy cuts in, a bit more pointed now. "But how do we know it's authentic if we don't see it?" The audience goes quiet. Henry leans back slightly, still composed. "Well, I suppose that's where trust comes in." There's a small wave of applause. Whoopi looks at him, studying his response. "You're very good at this." Henry chuckles. "At conversations?" Whoopi smirks. "At not answering the question directly." The audience reacts, some laughter, some tension. Henry nods slowly. "Or maybe I'm answering it in a way that reflects how I genuinely feel." Joy shakes her head slightly. It feels guarded. Henry doesn't flinch. It's thoughtful. That line lands harder than expected. A louder reaction from the audience, a mix of claps and oohs. Whoopi leans back now, crossing her arms slightly. So you think we're not being thoughtful? Henry quickly responds, still calm. No, not at all. I think you're asking important questions. I'm just answering them in a way that's true to me. There's a pause. The energy has shifted completely now. What started as a normal interview has turned into something much more layered. Sunny looks between them. This is interesting, because it feels like we're talking about two different expectations, what the public wants and what you're willing to give. Henry nods. Exactly. Joy adds, and sometimes those don't match. Henry smiles slightly. And that's okay. Whoopi looks at him again, this time with a more serious expression. But what happens when that mismatch creates frustration? Because people do get frustrated. Henry takes a breath. I think frustration often comes from expectation. And maybe, not all expectations are fair. The audience reacts again, louder this time. You can feel the tension building, but it's controlled. No one is shouting. No one is losing composure. But the disagreement is real. Whoopi leans forward again, her voice steady but firm. Or maybe, not all expectations are unreasonable. There's a beat. Henry meets her gaze, still calm, but now more direct than before. I think that depends on where those expectations come from. The room goes quiet. And just like that, the conversation has shifted from a casual interview into something much deeper. A real clash of perspectives unfolding live. On air, there's a brief silence after Henry's last line, the kind that doesn't usually happen on a live talk show unless something real is unfolding. You can feel the audience leaning in now, waiting to see who speaks next. Whoopi doesn't rush it. She looks at Henry for a second longer, then slightly nods, like she's deciding how far she wants to take this. All right, she says calmly, but with weight behind it. Let's talk about where those expectations come from. Henry sits forward just a bit, attentive. Whoopi continues. They come from the fact that people feel connected to you. They watch your films, they follow your career, they invest time in you. So when they want to know more, it's not always coming from a bad place. Henry nods respectfully. I agree. I don't think most curiosity comes from a bad place at all. Sunny jumps in, building on that. Right, but when someone feels connected, and then they feel shut out, that can feel personal. Henry takes a small breath. I understand that perspective. I really do. But I think there's a difference between feeling connected to someone's work and expecting access to their personal life. Joy leans in quickly. But that line isn't always clear, is it? Henry glances toward her. It can be, if we're honest about it. Joy raises an eyebrow. So you think the audience isn't being honest? A small ripple goes through the crowd, that slight, oh reaction again. Henry shakes his head gently. No, I think sometimes the conversation around it isn't honest. Whoopi narrows her eyes slightly. Explain that. Henry stays composed. I think we often blur the line between appreciation and entitlement. And when that happens, it creates tension. Sunny folds her hands together. But can you really blame people for that? The industry kind of encourages it. Henry nods. Yes, it does. And I think that's part of the problem. That line lands heavier than the others. The audience reacts, some clapping, some murmuring. Joy leans back slightly, crossing her arms. So now it's the industry's fault? Henry responds calmly, not fault. Responsibility. Whoopi lets out a small hum, clearly engaged now. Responsibility is a big word. Henry nods. It is. And I think everyone shares it. Media, studios, even audiences to some extent. Joy shakes her head slightly. That sounds like you're spreading the blame so no one's accountable. Henry looks directly at her, or recognizing that it's more complex than pointing fingers. A few louder claps break out. Joy glances toward the audience, then back at Henry. They like you. Henry smiles politely. I appreciate that. Whoopi cuts in before the tone softens too much. Let me bring it back to something specific. She leans forward, her voice more direct now. There have been moments where you've responded to public conversations, let's say strongly, when things are said about you that you don't like. Henry nods slowly. Yes. Whoopi continues. So in those moments, you step in. You correct it. You speak out. But then other times, you say, I want privacy. Can you see how that might feel selective? The audience reacts again. This is clearly the core of it. Henry doesn't answer immediately this time. He takes a second. I think that's a fair question, he says. That acknowledgement softens the room just slightly. But I'd say there's a difference between addressing something that's inaccurate and opening the door to everything. Sunny nods a bit. So you're saying you'll speak when it's about correcting something, but not just to satisfy curiosity? Henry looks at her. Exactly. Joy jumps in again. But who decides what counts as inaccurate? Henry answers without hesitation. I do. It's my life. There's a stronger audience reaction to that. Louder claps, a few surprised sounds. Joy tilts her head. That sounds convenient. Henry keeps his tone steady. It's not about convenience. It's about ownership. Whoopi leans back slightly, watching him closely again. Ownership over your narrative. Henry nods. Yes. Whoopi pauses, then says, but once you're in the public eye, is it fully yours anymore? That question hangs in the air. Henry meets it head-on. I believe it is. There's a noticeable shift. This is more direct than anything he's said so far. The audience reacts immediately, louder this time. Sunny looks intrigued. Even when millions of people are forming opinions about you every day? Henry nods. People can form opinions. That's their right. But those opinions don't define my reality. Joy lets out a small laugh. That's easy to say when you're successful. Henry smiles slightly, but there's a firmness now. I don't think success changes that principle. Whoopi raises a hand slightly, cutting in. But it changes the scale. Henry nods. It does. And that makes it more important, not less. There's a pause. You can feel the conversation getting sharper, but still controlled. No one is talking over each other yet. But the interruptions are coming quicker. The response is more direct. Sunny leans forward again. Let me ask you this. Do you ever feel misunderstood? Henry lets out a small breath, almost like he's been waiting for a question like that. Yes, he says simply. The audience quiets down a bit. Sunny continues. And does that frustration ever make you want to open up more, just to clear things up? Henry shakes his head gently. Not really. That answer surprises some people. You can hear it. Because I don't think you can ever fully control how you're perceived, he adds. No matter how much you explain. Whoopi nods slightly at that, but doesn't fully agree. But you can influence it. Henry acknowledges that. To a degree. Joy jumps back in, her tone sharper again. So why not do more of that? Why not be more open, more visible, more accessible? Henry looks at her, calm but now more direct than before. Because I don't think accessibility should come at the cost of authenticity. That line hits hard. The audience reacts loudly, clapping, a few yeah voices. Joy raises her eyebrows. So you think being open isn't authentic? Henry shakes his head. No, I think forced openness isn't authentic. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone tightening just a bit. And who decides what's forced? Henry answers immediately this time. I do. Another strong reaction from the audience. There's a clear divide now. Some people are fully on his side, others are unsure, but everyone is engaged. Whoopi studies him for a moment, then says, You're very firm on that. Henry nods. I have to be. Joy exhales. Or you choose to be. Henry meets her gaze again. Those are the same thing. That line gets a louder reaction than anything before. You can feel the temperature rising, not in a chaotic way, but in a focused, intense way. This isn't small talk anymore. This is a real disagreement playing out in real time. Sunny looks between them again, trying to keep the balance. I think what's interesting here is that you're drawing very clear lines, and that's not something we always see. Henry nods. I think clarity helps. Whoopi leans back, then forward again. She's not letting this go. But clarity can also feel like distance. Henry responds calmly, but there's a slight edge now. Distance isn't always a bad thing. The audience reacts again, a mix of agreement and tension. Whoopi tilts her head. Not for you, maybe. Henry doesn't look away. Not for anyone if it's healthy. That lands. A longer pause this time. And now the room feels different. The energy isn't just tense, it's divided. Some people are nodding, some are unsure, but no one is disengaged anymore. Whoopi finally leans back in her chair, crossing her arms slightly. All right, she says, her voice calm but firm. So what I'm hearing is you're comfortable with that distance. Henry nods once. Yes. And the way he says it, simple, direct, no hesitation, makes it clear that this isn't just a media answer anymore. This is personal, and everyone in the room can feel it. The moment Henry says yes, the air in the studio changes again. It's no longer just a debate. It feels like two completely different worldviews sitting across from each other, neither backing down. There's a pause longer than before. A few audience members shift in their seats. Someone lets out a quiet, wow, that gets picked up by a mic. Whoopi exhales slowly, then leans forward again, her tone measured but more pointed now. Okay, so let's take that a step further. Henry gives a small nod. Sure. Whoopi continues. You're comfortable with distance. You're comfortable deciding what people get to see and what they don't. But you're still participating in a system that thrives on visibility, attention, and connection. Henry listens carefully, not interrupting. So how do you reconcile that? She asks. Henry folds his hands loosely. By being clear about my boundaries within that system. Joy jumps in almost immediately. But that's exactly the contradiction. Henry glances toward her. I don't see it as one. Joy leans forward, more animated now. You can't say, I want the benefits of being in the spotlight, and then turn around and say, but I don't want the parts of it I don't like. That's not how it works. A few claps from parts of the audience. Henry nods, acknowledging the reaction. I understand why it might look that way. Whoopi adds, it doesn't just look that way. For a lot of people, it feels that way. Henry pauses for a moment before responding. I think there's a difference between accepting the reality of something and agreeing with every aspect of it. The audience quiets again. Sunny tilts her head. So you're saying you accept the system, but you don't fully agree with how it operates? Henry nods. Exactly. Joy shakes her head. But you're still benefiting from it. Henry responds calmly. Yes. And I'm also navigating it in a way that aligns with my values. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. And if your values clash with what the audience expects? Henry meets her gaze. Then they clash. That bluntness gets a strong reaction, louder than before. Joy lets out a short laugh. That's bold. Henry smiles slightly. Or just honest. There's a ripple of applause. Whoopi doesn't smile this time. She leans forward, elbows on the table. But honesty can come across as dismissive. Henry's expression stays steady. I don't intend it that way. Whoopi presses. Intent and impact aren't always the same. That line lands hard. Henry nods slowly. That's true. There's a brief moment where it seems like the tension might ease. But it doesn't. Sunny steps in, trying to unpack it. So how do you handle that? If people feel dismissed, even if that's not your intention. Henry thinks for a second. I think you listen. You acknowledge it. But you don't necessarily change your position just because someone disagrees. Joy immediately responds. That sounds like stubbornness. Henry turns slightly toward her. Or conviction. A louder, oh, comes from the audience. Joy raises her hands slightly. See, this is what I mean. You have an answer for everything. Henry chuckles lightly. I'm just answering the questions. Whoopi cuts in, her tone sharper now. But are you hearing the concern? Henry doesn't hesitate. Yes, I am. Whoopi leans in. Because it doesn't feel like it. That shifts the energy again. The audience quiets. This is more direct than anything she's said so far. Henry's expression tightens just slightly, but his voice remains calm. I hear the concern, he says. I just don't agree with the conclusion. That line hits. A mix of reactions, some clapping, some murmurs, a few surprised laughs. Joy looks at Whoopi, then back at Henry. So where does that leave the audience? Henry answers, free to feel however they want. Joy shakes her head. That feels like a cop-out. Henry responds more firmly now. I don't think it is. There's a noticeable shift. His tone isn't louder, but it's more direct, less softened than before. Sunny notices it too. You seem a bit more firm now. Henry gives a small nod. I'm just being clear. Whoopi sits back slightly, then forward again, not letting the moment pass. Let me ask you something else, she says. Henry looks at her. Of course. Whoopi continues. Do you think public figures have a responsibility beyond their work? Not just to entertain, but to engage, to be open, to contribute to conversations. Henry takes a breath. I think they can choose to, he says. But I don't think it should be an obligation. Joy reacts immediately. Why not? Henry looks at her. Because not everyone is equipped for that. And not everyone wants to live their life that way. Sunny nods slightly, considering that. But you are engaging right now, she points out. Henry smiles faintly. Yes. In a setting where I've chosen to. Whoopi leans in again. But once you're here, the questions don't come with conditions. Henry responds calmly. No, but my answers do. That line gets one of the biggest reactions so far. Applause breaks out, louder, more divided, but undeniable. Joy looks visibly surprised. Wow. Whoopi doesn't react outwardly, but her expression tightens just a bit. So you're saying you'll decide how far you go, no matter what's asked, she says. Henry nods. Yes. There's no hesitation. The room feels split now, some people clearly siding with him, others leaning toward the hosts. Sunny looks between them again. This is turning into a bigger conversation than I think anyone expected. A few laughs from the audience, easing the tension for a second. But Whoopi doesn't let it go. Because it is a bigger conversation, she says. It's about what people expect from the people they support. Henry responds, and what those people are willing to give. Joy adds quickly, and what happens when those two things don't match? Henry nods. Then you get conversations like this. That gets a mix of laughter and applause. For a brief moment, there's almost a sense of mutual acknowledgement, like both sides recognize what's happening. But it doesn't last. Whoopi leans forward one more time, her tone now very direct, very focused. Do you think, she says slowly, that there's ever a point where holding that line comes across as arrogance? The audience reacts immediately, louder, sharper. That's the most confrontational question yet. Henry doesn't answer right away. He looks at her, then briefly at the audience, then back at her. When he speaks, his voice is still calm, but there's a weight to it now that wasn't there at the start. I think it can be perceived that way, he says. Whoopi watches him closely. And does that matter to you? There's a pause. This one feels different. Henry takes a breath. Yes, he says. It does. The room quiets again. But, he continues, I don't think changing who you are to avoid being misunderstood is the right solution. That lands harder than anything else so far. A strong wave of applause breaks out, louder, more sustained. Joy looks at the audience, then back at Henry. They're really with you on that. Henry glances briefly toward the crowd, then back at the table. I think people understand authenticity. Whoopi doesn't smile. Or they agree with you, she says. Henry meets her gaze. Maybe both. And just like that, the tension hits another peak. Not explosive, but solid, unshakable. No one's backing down. No one's changing their position. And now, it's clear to everyone watching. This isn't just a conversation anymore. It's a standoff. The word standoff isn't said out loud, but it's exactly what the room feels like. There's a long pause after Henry's last line. Maybe both. It lingers in the air, and for a moment, no one jumps in. That almost never happens on a live show like this. A few audience members clap again, softer this time, like they're unsure if they should break the silence. Whoopi finally leans back in her chair, exhales, and gives a small nod. All right, she says, her tone calmer now but still firm. I think we've made our positions pretty clear. Henry nods once. I think so too. There's a slight shift, not a resolution, but an acknowledgement that neither side is moving. Joy adjusts in her seat, glancing between them. Well, this was definitely not the interview I expected. A few laughs break out, easing the tension just a little. Henry smiles politely. Conversations rarely go exactly as expected. Sunny leans in slightly, her tone softer now. I will say this. Even if we don't all agree, I think people watching are going to have a lot to think about. Henry nods. I hope so. Whoopi looks at him again, this time less confrontational, more reflective. You held your ground, she says. Henry responds simply, so did you. That line gets a small but genuine reaction from the audience. A mix of claps and quiet appreciation. There's a moment where it almost feels like mutual respect settles in, even if the disagreement is still very much there. Joy breaks it with a half smile. I still think you're a little guarded. Henry chuckles softly. And I still think I'm just being myself. More laughter from the audience. Whoopi gestures slightly with her hand. Fair enough. There's a brief pause as the energy resets. You can feel the show trying to come back to its usual rhythm, but something has clearly shifted. Sunny turns slightly toward the camera. Well, whether you agree with Henry or with us, this is one of those conversations people are definitely going to be talking about. The audience claps. Joy nods. Oh, social media is already going to be on fire. A few people in the audience laugh knowingly. Whoopi adds, that's the world we live in now. Henry gives a small nod. It is. There's a quick glance from one producer off camera. A subtle signal to start wrapping things up. Sunny smiles. Before we go, Henry, anything you want to say to the audience watching? Henry takes a second, then looks toward the camera. Just thank you for your support. And for watching, whether you agree with me or not. A wave of applause follows that, louder, more unified than before. Whoopi nods. That's fair. Joy adds, very diplomatic. Henry smiles slightly but doesn't respond. The segment starts to close, but the energy in the room is still charged. You can feel it. People are going to leave the studio talking about what just happened. As the cameras begin to pull back slightly, the hosts shift into their closing rhythm, but the conversation still lingers. And then it cuts. Within minutes of the segment airing, clips start spreading online. Short moments, Henry saying, "It's my life." Another clip, "My answers do." And of course, the one that gets the most attention, "I hear the concern. I just don't agree with the conclusion." People begin picking sides almost instantly. Some viewers are praising Henry, calling him composed, respectful, and firm. Comments start flooding in about how he didn't lose his cool and stood his ground without being disrespectful. Others side with the hosts, saying the questions were fair, that public figures should expect scrutiny, and that the conversation needed to happen. On platforms like X and TikTok, clips rack up views quickly. Reaction videos start popping up. Some breaking down his responses line by line, others focusing on Whoopi's questions and whether they were too aggressive or completely justified. Even people who didn't watch the full segment are weighing in. "That line about my answers do. That was cold," one viral comment reads. Another says, "He wasn't rude, but he definitely wasn't backing down." Meanwhile, some critics argue that he avoided giving deeper answers, while supporters push back, saying that was exactly his point. Backstage, the atmosphere is noticeably different. Some crew members are quietly talking about how intense the segment felt. One producer mentions it was one of the most real conversations they've had in a while. The hosts themselves take a moment off camera. Joy shakes her head slightly, half smiling. "He's tough." Sunny nods. "He's very controlled." Whoopi, standing near the table, simply says, "He knows exactly what he's doing." Not angry, not dismissive, just certain. Henry, on the other side, is speaking briefly with someone from his team. He looks calm, composed, the same way he did on stage. No raised voices. No visible frustration. Just a quiet conversation before he heads out. By the end of the day, major entertainment pages are covering the moment. Headlines vary depending on perspective. Henry Cavill holds his ground in heated daytime debate, clash on live TV. Different views on fame and privacy. Fans divided after tense talk show exchange. The full clip continues gaining traction, with people rewatching certain parts, analyzing tone, expressions, even pauses. Some viewers say it felt uncomfortable. Others say it felt necessary. Most agree on one thing: it felt real. And that's what keeps it circulating. Because it didn't feel scripted. It didn't feel polished. It felt like a genuine disagreement, happening in real time, with no easy resolution. Back in the studio, the next segment has already started, but the earlier conversation hasn't left the room. You can still feel it in the way the audience reacts, slightly more attentive, slightly more aware. Because they just watched something different. Not a performance. A clash. And now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Henry Cavill right to hold his ground, or did the hosts have a point about public expectations? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.